That night, in the Subura, I saw a ghost. Not a spirit of the dead, but something far more terrifying. Our Empress, Valeria Messalina, selling her flesh in a common brothel. You think you know Roman decadence? Believe me, that was only the beginning of the nightmare that would drown an entire empire. The stench of cheap wine and cooking grease clung to the air, a cacophony of laughter and shouted curses spilling from every doorway. I was taking a shortcut through this filthy alley, pulling the hood of my toga tight to mask my senatorial status, when a scene in a grimy lupanar froze me in place. Under the flickering oil lamps, a woman in cheap makeup was servicing a drunken porter. But through the pale powder and garish red paint, I recognized the delicate features. My blood ran cold. This was not some common prostitute. This was the Empress of the Roman Empire. How was this possible? Only a few years prior, in 38 CE, all of Rome had celebrated the perfect imperial wedding. Valeria Messalina, barely 15 years old, married Emperor Claudius in a ceremony that symbolized everything we Romans valued: nobility, fertility, and the continuation of divine bloodlines. She was everything an empress should be. Young, beautiful, from an ancient patrician family, and capable of providing the empire with legitimate heirs. Claudius, 30 years her senior, and physically disabled from what modern medicine recognizes as cerebral palsy, seemed grateful to have secured such a prize. I was there, among the senators, watching her walk with appropriate dignity. Contemporary accounts described her as possessing classical Roman beauty, pale skin, golden hair, and the refined features that marked aristocratic breeding. She fulfilled her imperial duties perfectly, bearing Claudius's 2 children and appearing at state functions with unimpeachable dignity. In a society where women were divided into rigid categories, virtuous wives and mothers at the highest tier, and in prostitutes and entertainers. At the bottom, an empress was expected to embody feminine virtue so completely that even a rumor of impropriety could destabilize the government. But the marble walls of the Palatine Palace could not contain the whispers. Soon, peculiar stories began to circulate. At first, they seemed harmless. The young empress, it was said, would dismiss her guards at unusual hours, claiming fatigue, then emerge from her chambers wearing simple clothes that concealed her identity. We who heard them dismissed it as the harmless rebellion of a young woman seeking adventure outside the suffocating protocols of palace life. We were terribly mistaken. Messalina's midnight excursions quickly evolved from innocent escapism into something far more calculated and disturbing. She began studying the routines of Rome's prostitutes, learning their techniques, their territories, and their clients. This wasn't casual observation. She was conducting research with the methodical precision of a military campaign. The first true shock came in 41 CE. The news spread through the aristocracy like a plague, whispered at dinner parties and behind closed doors. Messalina had challenged Sylla, the most famous and desired courtesan in all of Rome, to an endurance competition. The rules were straightforward. Whoever could service the most clients between sunset and dawn would win a fortune in gold. A lavish villa was turned into a flesh arena for the contest. Roman nobility packed the venue, placing bets while watching their emperor's wife compete like a gladiator. Sylla, a professional with years of experience, paced herself carefully throughout the night. By dawn, she had serviced 25 men and declared herself exhausted but victorious. Messalina was just getting started. Even after Sylla conceded defeat, the Empress continued accepting new clients, driven by a compulsion that went far beyond mere sexual appetite. Historical accounts suggest she ultimately serviced over 30 men that night, stopping only when no more volunteers could be found. Her victory wasn't celebrated. It was witnessed in horrified silence by Romans, who realized they were watching something unprecedented and deeply disturbing. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a desperate woman forced into degrading circumstances. This was the most powerful woman in the world, choosing humiliation as entertainment. She had discovered that her imperial status made debasement more thrilling, not less. The greater the contrast between her public dignity and private degradation, the more intense her satisfaction became. Standing in that foul Subura alley, staring at the ghost of our Empress, I knew that contest wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a systematic perversion, a madness being forged into a weapon, and I was afraid that soon we would all become its victims. My fear soon became reality. Messalina's madness was no longer a whispered secret. It became a tool. In 42 CE, she crossed a line, transforming herself from a scandalous empress into a genuine threat to imperial security. She established a high-end brothel, operating under imperial protection, staffed by aristocratic women, and serving the city's most powerful men. It was disguised as a private club in a luxurious villa. An invitation was not an honor. It was a summons. I received such an invitation. Compelled by fear of reprisal, I went. Inside, the air was thick with expensive perfume and quiet desperation. The women who served us, they were the wives and daughters of my colleagues, of other senators. Messalina had made us complicit in our own humiliation. Every encounter was documented by hidden servants, gathering intelligence that Messalina could later use for political manipulation. She had created a perfect honey trap, turning sexual shame into political control. We were bound by a web of shared guilt, daring not to oppose her wishes. The Senate's decisions began to warp. Military appointments went to unqualified candidates who had the Empress's favor. The empire was being quietly subverted by a brothel madam who happened to be married to the emperor. But even this systematic corruption was nothing compared to what came next. In 48 CE, Messalina's obsession with power and scandal reached its ultimate expression. While Emperor Claudius was away in Ostia overseeing grain shipments, Messalina held a full wedding ceremony with Gaius Silius, a handsome young senator she had been pursuing for months. This was no secret affair. It was a legal Roman marriage, complete with religious ceremonies, official witnesses, and formal contracts. I was forced to attend. The aristocratic crowd gathered in the gardens, every face a mask of concealed panic. We were witnessing an act of open treason. Messalina, still Claudius's wife, was remarrying. She began referring to herself as Silius's Empress, apparently believing she could simply replace Claudius through the force of her will and the compliance of her blackmail victims. Silius stood there, pale, a pawn trapped in her deadly game. The nightmare broke when Claudius's loyal freedmen risked their lives to inform him. The emperor's initial reaction was disbelief, but as evidence mounted, he realized he faced not just personal betrayal, but potential civil war. The retribution was swift and brutal. Claudius returned to Rome with loyal troops. The sounds of the wedding party died down, replaced by the rhythmic stomp of military sandals on stone. Panic erupted. Messalina was confronted in the gardens where she was celebrating her new marriage. I was not there to see it, but I saw the Praetorian Guard centurion receive the order directly from Narcissus, Claudius's freedman. The officer's face was stone. He did not need to be told twice. I did not see the blade fall. None of us did. The execution scene was swift, an almost clinical, administrative event. From my villa, I only heard the unnatural silence that descended upon the Palatine. No scream reached me, only a heavy void. The web of terror woven from shame and sex had finally encountered a force stronger than itself, the survival instinct of the empire. Hours later, a proclamation was read across Rome. Claudius had ordered damnatio memoriae. Messalina's name was to be removed from all public monuments, her images destroyed, and her memory condemned to oblivion. To speak of her existence was now treason. The Empress, who had used sexual power to control an empire, was herself controlled and erased by the ultimate expression of state power. The nightmare was over, but the silence it left behind was, somehow, more terrifying than the madness that had come before.